Welcome to the Religious Studies Podcast. Just so you know, this deep dive has been generated with some help from AI, but all the factual content, everything we're digging into today, has been carefully checked against our source material.
That's right. And today we're setting out to explore the really fascinating world of myth and meaning through the eyes of Claude Lévi-Strauss.
A huge figure in 20th century thought. We're focusing specifically on insights from his book Myth and Meaning, which is known for being surprisingly, well, clear and personal for him.
Yeah, it really is. Our sources are the foreword, the publisher's note, and the introduction to that book. They give you a great entry point into his thinking.
So our mission today, essentially, is to unpack Levi-Strauss's structuralist approach. How did he think myths worked? What are they made of?
And crucially, how does this connect to human thought itself? Why are his ideas still, so relevant if you're interested in culture, belief systems?
And specifically for our listeners, how does this help us understand the core ways humans make sense of the world, including the sacred?
Exactly. So let's dive in. There's a fantastic little story in the foreword that sort of perfectly introduces the man.
Oh yeah, the Berkeley anecdote.
That's the one. He's in Berkeley, goes to a restaurant, gives his name.
And the hostess just stares, eyes wide.
Right. And asks, oh, wow, the anthropologist or the genes?
The genes, it's brilliant.
It is. And the source uses it to highlight this idea that there were always kind of two Levi-Strausses, which is, pretty fitting for a guy who studied how we split everything into pairs.
Very neat. So this is Claude Lévi-Strauss, born 1908, became professor of anthropology at the prestigious Collège de France.
And he's really seen as the founder of structural anthropology. That approach was laid out properly in his 1958 book, Anthropologie structurale.
Okay, structural anthropology and myth. Let's get to the core of it.
Right.
What was his big idea? What was he seeing?
Well, his main assertion really was that mythology isn't just, a bunch of stories. It's a process, a dialectic process.
Dialectic meaning, like a back and forth, an argument.
Sort of. It's humanity trying to make cognitive sense of all the chaotic, often contradictory stuff that experience throws at us. Nature, life, it's messy.
And trying to make sense of it pushes us towards dualisms.
Exactly. That's where the human imagination goes, he argued. It creates these pairs, these binary oppositions.
Like raw versus cooked. That's a famous one of his.
That's a classic. Or nature culture, male, female, good, evil, life, death. You find these everywhere in myths across the globe.
And these pairs, these dualisms, they create tension, right?
They do. And human thought, according to Levi-Strauss, instinctively tries to resolve that tension. It introduces mediating terms or figures.
Things that sort of bridge the gap. Like trickster figures, maybe.
Tricksters are a great example. Or concepts like androgyny, something that's both male and female, trying to resolve that binary.
Okay, but here's where it gets a bit tricky, right? That mediating term. It doesn't actually solve the problem.
No, that's the crucial insight. That mediating term, like androgyny, it just becomes one half of a new opposition.
Ah, I see. So androgyny might then be contrasted with, what, sexlessness, maybe?
Exactly. And that creates a new tension, needing a new mediation, and it can just keep going, potentially forever. This splitting and mediating, that's the engine of mythical thought for him.
Wow. And he saw this linked to language and even the brain.
He did, yeah. For him, myth is fundamentally a type of language. And language itself seems to push us towards thinking in pairs using these dichotomies.
But he took it deeper to the physical brain.
He speculated, yeah. He suggested maybe the underlying reason is the brain structure. Two hemispheres, two eyes, two hands. It's like we process the world by chopping it in half.
Like a basic computer almost. Binary.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Our simplest way of processing seems to be binary. And that's a powerful idea for religious studies, isn't it? Maybe all those dualisms in religious systems, good, evil, secret, profane, aren't just cultural quirks.
But something rooted in how our minds actually work.
Potentially, yeah. Something about the basic architecture of human cognition.
Okay, so if dualisms and mediation are the process, what are the actual bits and pieces, building blocks?
Right, he needed a term for those. He called them myth themes.
Myth themes, like phonemes in language.
Exactly the inspiration.
Yeah.
His colleague, the linguist Roman Jacobson, talked about phonemes as the basic units of sound. Levi-Strauss saw myth themes as the basic atomic units of narrative, the smallest meaningful chunks of a myth.
And myths aren't just made up from scratch. They use these mythemes.
Precisely. They're constructed, or maybe reconstructed is better, using these existing units. He used this great French term, bricoleur.
The bricoleur, like
Yeah.
a handyman, a tinkerer.
Yeah. Or the source suggests maybe rag and bones man catches the spirit in English. someone who doesn't create from new materials, but gathers up existing bits and pieces.
The rag and bones man, I like that. So the bricoleur takes these mythemes, old plot points, character types, symbols.
These rags and bones of narratives,
Yeah,
exactly. And recycles them, reassembles them into new stories or new versions of old stories.
It highlights that storytelling, even in sacred contexts, isn't always about pure invention.
Right. It's often remixing, reusing. Recycling is ancient in narrative. Every myth connects back through this shared pool of mythemes. It suggests our stories, our religious narratives, are deeply layered, deeply interconnected.
He really explored this in depth in his big work, Mythologics, 4 volumes.
Monumental stuff, published between 64 and 71. But there's an interesting point about the English title.
Introduction to a Science of Mythology.
Yeah. He apparently didn't like that title. He felt it was wrong.
Why? Wasn't he trying to be scientific about myth?
Well, yes and no. He felt the real metaphor for mythologies wasn't science, but actually art. Music, specifically.
Music, like patterns and fugues.
Exactly. He thought about myth structures, like complex musical pieces. And he insisted you could only really translate a myth with another myth, not boil it down to some scientific formula.
But still, some people did see him as coldly scientific. The source mentions Jungians, for example. Where did that perception come from?
It partly came from his more, let's say, formal side. He did argue that the logical patterns in myths could sometimes be expressed mathematically. He even developed that canonical formula.
Ah, right. That's the sort of analytical side. The source calls it his mathematical Mr. Hyde.
That's a great way to put it. The abstract formulaic side.
But then there's the other side, the lyrical Dr. Jekyll from his earlier book, Tristes Tropiques.
Absolutely. Tristes Tropiques from 1955 is totally different. It's deeply personal, subjective fieldwork written with such passion and lyricism. It basically invented a new kind of anthropological writing.
So it reveals a different Lévi-Strauss, more poet than theorist.
You could say that. The source talks about these two lions, the famous cerebral critic of mythologiques, and this less appreciated, passionate, almost political poet of Tristes Tropiques.
You know, it's like his theory described this very rigorous, deductive method for analysis.
The abstract steps, yeah.
But his actual practice, how he worked, was maybe more intuitive, flying by the seat of his pants, pulling out these fantastic rabbits.
Kind of implicitly saying, do as I do, not just as I say. It's a fascinating tension, isn't it? Between the neat theory and the messy creativity involved.
And that tension seems to echo in another split. The specific data from, say, South American tribes, like the Boro.
And the grand theories he built that seemed to be about all human thought. Universal claims.
The source calls him a closet universalist.
It does. And it points out he acknowledged a debt to Freud, a father of all latter-day universalists, as the source puts it.
And maybe he pushed back against being called a universalist because he didn't want to be mistaken for Jung.
That's the speculation. Terror of being lumped in with Jung's archetypes. It's a different kind of universalism.
How so? Jung was about innate psychic structures, right? Inherited archetypes.
Yeah, whereas Lévi-Strauss was more focused on universal cognitive processes, the way we structure thought, like using binary oppositions, regardless of the specific content. Similar territory, maybe, but different maps.
But in Myth and Meaning, the book we're focusing on, the source says he kind of comes out of the universalist closet.
He does seem much more direct about it there. He makes statements that lean much more heavily into universalism.
Like what?
Like the idea that our mind needs order because the universe has order, and our mind is just part of that ordered universe. He says things like that quite explicitly, page 13 in the book, apparently. It's a noticeable shift.
So why is Myth and Meaning so different? Why so clear, so direct?
Well, the source argues the key reason is how it started. It wasn't written as a dense academic book. It came from talks he gave in English.
For CBC Radio's Ideas program back in 1977,
Right.
Based on conversations.
Exactly. Conversations with Carol or Jerome.
So being spoken and being in English, that actually helped? Seems odd.
But the argument is it was hugely beneficial. First, the orality.
Yeah.
Lévi-Strauss himself talked about primitive thought being better described as thought without writing.
And he thought people without writing maybe use their minds differently, more sensory perception.
Yeah, develop different mental capacities. So the suggestion is maybe the spoken format allowed him a certain spontaneity, a directness, maybe even a sensitivity that got polished away in his written French.
Interesting. And the English factor.
He was pretty honest about it. He said he had to simplify things because basically it was too complicated to explain fully in English.
Not an insult to English, though.
No, the source sees it as a positive constraint. It forced him to avoid those really complex French, verbal, triple trapeze flips, as the source calls them. He had to use a verbal myth.
Simpler language, clearer structure.
And the result, the source argues strongly, is that nothing else he produced, written or spoken, conveys his core ideas with such personal force and direct commitment. It's uniquely clear.
It sounds like it has a different feel, more intimate. You mentioned autobiographical bits earlier.
Yeah, like drawing opera costumes as a kid, or that lovely memory about noticing Boulanger the baker and Boucher the butcher start with the same sound. He saw that little childhood insight as a sort of founding myth for his own structuralism.
Those details make the big abstract ideas feel more grounded, more human.
Definitely. And myth and meaning really brings together all those key tensions he wrestled with. Myth in science, myth in history, myth in music.
And that whole primitive versus civilized thought idea, which he reframes as without writing, offering new takes on the savage mind.
Right, it revisits those big themes, but with his newfound clarity.
Okay, let's circle back to the structuralist method itself. The search for the invariant pattern beneath the surface differences. That's key to finding the themes, right?
It is. That's what structuralism is great at, finding the underlying logic, the persistent elements, even when stories seem very different on the surface.
You mentioned inversions, like mother kills son versus son kills mother. Same basic myth-theme relationship, just flipped.
Exactly. But a common criticism of classic structuralism was that it sometimes struggled with, well, time, with history, cause and effect chronology, that they didn't always fit neatly into the static structural models.
It felt a bit disconnected from how things actually change and develop.
That was the knock, yeah, that it was ahistorical.
Does myth and meaning tackle that criticism?
Crucially, yes. The source really emphasizes this. This book directly faces that stumbling block of chronology. He explicitly connects the structural models to history.
How so?
He argues myths have both aspects. They have a diachronic dimension. They change, evolve, develop through historical time. But they also have a synchronic dimension, those timeless underlying structures that persist.
So it's not either structure or history.
No, it's both hand. He even gives an example in the book, tracing how specific myths developed culturally. There's a section called Hair, Lips, and Twins, the splitting of a myth. It shows the method applied historically.
That feels really important, especially for religious studies, where you're always dealing with traditions that have deep histories but also claim timeless truths.
Absolutely. Integrating structure and history is vital there.
Okay, so if you're new to Lévi-Strauss and maybe a bit intimidated by the mathematical Mr. Hyde, how should you approach reading him? The source had that great bus analogy.
Yeah, I loved that. The advice is basically jettison Lévi-Strauss right before the moment when he finally deconstructs himself.
Get off his bus one stop before he does.
Exactly. Don't necessarily follow his line of thought all the way to its most extreme or abstract conclusion. Use his analysis, but maybe stop short of buying the entire grand theory wholesale.
Getting off his bus doesn't mean you've reached the final destination for understanding myth, though.
No way. The source makes that clear. You often need other buses, insights from theology, psychology, history, other perspectives. You need transfers on the journey.
But myth and meaning is maybe a better starting point because it gives you more of those transfer points. The windows are cleaner.
That's the idea. You can see out as well as in more clearly. It lays out the core concepts without maybe getting quite as lost in the theoretical stratosphere as some of his other work.
There's that really powerful personal reflection from Lévi-Strauss himself in the introduction to Myth and Meaning about how his books get written.
Yeah, written through me, not by me. It's quite striking.
And it connects directly to that famous line of his.
Myths get thought in man unbeknownst to him. Right? A lot of people challenge that empirically, like, how can you prove that?
But he says in this introduction, that phrase perfectly describes his own experience of thinking and writing.
Yeah. He felt this lack of personal agency, like he wasn't the one actively directing the thoughts.
He felt like a crossroads where something is going on. Purely passive, no real me in charge.
That's how he described his subjective feeling. He thought different people, different scholars, act as different kinds of crossroads, and each unique perspective offers a valid glimpse into humanity.
He wasn't saying everyone feels this way.
No, but that his way of experiencing thought opened up a particular valuable outlook. And that raises really deep questions, doesn't it? Especially in religion. About inspiration, revelation. Where do ideas truly come from?
Are we the thinkers, or is thought happening through us, shaped by these deeper structures he was talking about?
It's a profound question about consciousness and creativity.
The publisher's note in the book actually lists the key questions that Carroll or Jerome asked him, the ones that structured the original talks. They're great prompts for thinking about all this.
They really get to the heart of it. Questions like, is he saying we should ditch science and go back to myth?
What is structuralism anyway, and where did it come from? Is order necessary for meaning? Can meaning exist in chaos? Why do we seem to prefer order?
How does primitive thought or thought without writing actually compare to scientific thinking? Is it inferior? Are we using less of our mental capacity now than mythical thinkers did? Echoing Aldous Huxley.
And some really relevant ones for religious studies. Given the similarities he found, can focusing on them help bridge cultural divides? Does the anthropologist impose order on myths, or is it already there?
What's the real difference between how myth organizes ideas versus how history does? Does myth use historical facts, transform them?
And that connection between myth and music, again, they both come from language but went different ways. Those questions really map out the territory of the book.
They absolutely do. It covers so much ground.
Wow. Okay, so we've really journeyed through Levi-Strauss's world in this deep dive. We met the man of two halves, unpacked structuralism, dualisms, myth themes, the bricolore.
We wrestled with that science versus art tension, his different personas, and highlighted why myth and meaning is such a uniquely valuable text. Its clarity, its personal touch.
And we've underscored why his ideas matter for understanding myth and culture that search for order being deeply human, maybe universal, but also shaped by history.
A complex balance.
So as we wrap up, here's that final thought for you, the listener, building on Levi-Strauss's own feeling. If myth, and maybe thought itself, sometimes feels like it happens through us.
Shaped by these binary structures, recycle bits and pieces like the bricoleur.
What does that imply about creativity? About belief? About your own sense of self? Is that me at the crossroads just assembling bits that were already there?
It's a challenging thought, especially when thinking about religious belief and identity. Where does the personal conviction come in if the structures are so fundamental?
We hope this deep dive into Levi-Strauss's myth and meaning has sparked some new thinking for you about myth, culture, and the mind, particularly from a religious studies angle.
It's certainly given us a lot to think about again.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
If you enjoyed this exploration, please do consider following the Religious Studies podcast.
And maybe leave us a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are curious about these kinds of fascinating topics.